I'm going to read the appreciations of the artists more or less in alphabetical order. It seems to me there's no reason to prioritize them any other way. And as I said, since I'm not dealing with a thematic, I think one should have them just appear as they come. The first of which, therefore, is Terry Atkins, whose work I've seen in the studio here in Brooklyn. And in fact, this particular piece I saw at a retrospective show of his in Trenton about 6 months ago or so. So it was sort of an old friend in a way when it showed up. And it has the qualities of the best of his work, and there's a lot of it. I mean, he's an extremely accomplished guy, which is to make things that have very strong and rather direct formal qualities. To deal with a cylinder, to deal with a ring or a disc, or to deal with keyboards, for example. He's used a good deal, piano keyboards and organ keyboards, where you have regular intervals that are gridded in a sense, but they're not standard modern art grids and so on. To take those things which are quite formal and characteristic, and then at the same time make full use and unsentimental use of the found object properties of the materials with which he makes them. That he is able to bring in the kind of grit of the city and a sense of the history of objects and their use and the patinas that they acquire without it being corny. And since there's a great deal of extremely corny work in this neighborhood, it's a sort of double distinction to go into territory which has been colonized by people with far less talent and far less specific reason for doing what they're doing, and to come out of it with, as I say, memorable objects. And in this case, it's a particular object that I was glad to see again. A lot of the recent conceptual photography that's being done, that I respond to anyway, is sort of ludic in character. It's playful rather than argumentative, but it's based on a tradition of photography which does come from postmodern argument of one kind or another. I think Jennifer Blandy's photograph is very droll. It has lots of associations, and some of them are, if you will, if you read into the photograph, what happens if all those trucks take off at once? The integrity of the hand gets exploded in this way that is violent in contrast to the toy-like quality of it. I think also the famous Picasso photograph of the two rolls sitting on the table that look as if they're his hands. They're five-fingered Southern French rolls. Anyway, it simply puts itself forward without explaining why it's there, and yet it's full of details that could be read lots of different ways. Kirsten Eckhardt is an artist with whom I've had a sort of complicated and wholly indirect relationship. His play with frames in the late 80s or middle 80s, early 90s seemed to me high style, but obvious. And this particular piece, the one that's sort of for use in this exercise, it seems to be a significant shift away. He's really making abstract art rather than commenting on the formatting of painting. And he's using the devices of framing and mounting to do it. But it comes up with something which is much more distinctive and puzzling, and which plays off the conventions of painting in a much more provocative way. The center of the image is a void. This is what? This is a space for any number of subject matters which simply drop out. The way in which it's mounted and all the apparatus itself points toward what paintings are as devices, really. But then it's very beautiful on its own terms. Daryl Ellis is an artist whose work I have seen on a couple of occasions, but particularly a show that was at Art in General about 2 years ago, I guess. And I found extremely interesting and very moving, actually. The piece in this show is a manipulated photograph, but there's a whole body of graphic work, and there's some very, very fine drawings as well. And the fact that they fed back and forth into each other, it was not drawing after photography or photography after drawing, but this sense that the way to report on a world and the presence of the viewer in it and the presence of the artist or his people close to him in this world, by addition, by subtraction, by cancellation, and so on and so forth, was all of a piece. That the means of art were being turned directly towards describing something which was more than the documentary subject, but very much about the participation in the image and the participation in the world that it represented. And it's really a pity that there isn't more of this work. Okay, Megan Gale is an artist I know nothing about, have never seen her work, don't know her name, probably should, but haven't. And where I'm betting on a slide, because the slide doesn't tell me all that I would like to know. My slide projector certainly doesn't help. But in fact, it's a very, very striking image. And it's unclear what this particular posture is. It's unclear what the drawing device, if you will, of framing your body in sort of stitching strokes and so on is about. And when I say slides live, it's very hard to tell whether those really are stitches or whether they're the etched parts or whether they're a combination of both. But in any case, it is any image which is memorable on the first shot, you know, is worth a shot. I said that some of the artists in this show are my near neighbors, and Maria Elena Gonzalez is one of them. And I've been to her studio, and I've seen work of hers up at the Museo del Barrio and in other contexts. And I'm impressed by the austerity of this particular combination of objects in relation to other things I've seen of her. It seems to me it's a part of a change that's been going on for some time, but the clearest statement of that change, that these objects are sort of mated for in a certain way, but they're not simply minimalist. I mean, the use of bathroom tiles, the way in which they're placed opposite each other, it is very unclear what the transaction is that's going on between them, but it's clearly not a purely formal transaction. Again, this is associative, and this is, I guess, part of what one does as a curator. I'm reminded of the little stools that appear in the Nobuyoshi Araki photographs of the prostitutes in Tokyo. And where the prostitutes sit on one stool and the John sits on another. And it's this immaculate bathroom situation where there's a lot of rub-a-dub-dub. I do not want to ascribe this to Maria Elena's work, but there is clearly something going on here that is, if you will, the erotics of coldness. Sam Kunz is an artist who I also know from the past, and she did a very large installation at the John Good Gallery about, I think, 2 years ago, which I was very impressed by, and was somebody who was chosen, I think, recently for the Tiffany Foundation grants, and in the context of that saw other works. This particular piece I don't know. It seems to me that there are lots of ways of approaching her work. It clearly is about ecologies, it is about systems. There's a whole range of broad, if you will, social, political, environmental concerns there, but a lot of it has to do with the ability to make a compelling and convincing thing. Planting vegetable material into a concrete block could, at the worst, and the worst is not only conceivable, but I've seen it, turn out to be something like a postmodernist Chiba pet. And to be able to use the plant material as a kind of form in relationship to another kind of form, and to have the discreteness of the growing vital material really work with the inertness of the cast material, is more than a matter of touch. And it's why the ideas that are contained in these works are not didactic, even though they come from a world of thinking, if you will, about large issues. Again, it's probably not a good practice to inject a lot of personal association and memories, but of course curators do that all the time, they just don't tell you. So that my interest in these things is not confined to the fact that they trigger such associations, but it's certainly not despite it either. I remember when I was a kid, a friend of mine who lived in a house that was always darkened, and his mother sat and drank and smoked and watched the Three Stooges. When I saw this piece, I thought, Now, I'm led to believe that this is not, in fact, the immediate circumstances that David Scher has based this piece on, but the appetites for cigarettes and television and sitting in mid-America of sheer time-killing and probably self-killing that goes with it is very evocative in this, and it's funny and deeply morbid all at the same time. And this is real American Gothic without the smiles. I was puzzled by the title "Lack" in Jessica Stockholder's piece, since she seems to lack nothing. She has all the moves of a terrific stylist, and she has all the materials in the world at her disposal. And therefore, without being able to read the image more carefully, I can't be sure of what it is that's missing, or whether this is a reference to Freudian, Lacanian lack, or whatever it is. But anyway, it's an odd title, given that mostly what her work seems to be about is about plenitude, actually, about the sort of the richness of the visual world and its underlying orderliness. Like a number of other artists active now, she is extremely disciplined composer of images. If composition was something that people in the 1960s worked against in favor of rigid structures and, if you will, predictable organizational devices, she's a pictorial composer. She puts a dab of red here and a thingamajobby there and so on, and does it on a kind of Al-Hild scale ×2 ×3. And therefore it's a matter of dealing with an artist who has taken a theatrical space and dealt with it in a very disciplined, formless manner, against the tendencies of sort of Baroque excess, even though she's using many of its devices. I spoke about cold erotics in relation to Marilena Gonzalez, and something of the same is present in Collier Shore's work. Her fantasies are not my fantasies, probably, but she manages to convey those fantasies and the lure, if you will, of her subjects very, very well in the most dispassionate, most sort of, trying to think of what the exact photo quality is. I can't get it, but anyway, dispassionate will have to do for the moment. Clean also. And that here you have a very beautiful boy in a military uniform. And at least I think it's a boy. Again, slides lie, and also boys and girls often are more alike than not. But in any case, it is a case of where you present an image which could be interpreted easily in all kinds of psychologically loaded ways. Commentaries on the war machine, although frankly the Swedish war machine is not a cause for worry. Commentaries on youthful militarism, etc., etc., etc. And she's twisted this around and made it this very sort of factual account of how sort of how would you say, uniforms work for a reason. People wear them because they idealize and they normalize and they take out the bumps and lumps. And this guy looks pretty good to begin with, but certainly there's something about that image which is about the attraction of it, and about attraction period more so than anything else.